Well, hey, welcome back to Grace Community's virtual church. We are glad you're here. It's been a kind of a new experience, almost like becoming a parent again for the first time. It's been a crazy time for us here at Grace as we've tried to bring this kind of brand new ministry, online ministry, into the world, and God's been gracious to take care of us. In fact, I kind of have a story about that. My son, when he was about to be born 5 years ago or so, he came very early, 6 weeks early, in fact, and the hospital that we took him to was afraid to have him to deliver him there. So we ended up having him delivered at a hospital in Pittsburgh because the one that we were with in Seneca chose to put my wife in a helicopter. Crazy story. They put her in a helicopter, fly my family with the helicopter down to Pittsburgh, and they it was a pretty wild experience. But what was really truly amazing about it was I wasn't afraid. I was very trusting of our medical system because this hospital was now not going to be able to deliver our child, but they gave that privilege to another hospital. They weren't worried about the benefits of delivering the child there, whether it be monetary or numbers or the kind of the name that they would get for having another successful birth in their building, but they chose to give up all of the benefits so that another hospital could give us care that maybe they would potentially not be able to. There's just so many unknowns with premature children. So they sent us down there. And one of the interesting facts about humanity is if you really want to know the truth about somebody, watch them go through a difficult situation. Watch them go through something hard. Watch them have to give something up. That's when you'll really get to see the truth about who a person is. And in the world today, everyone's got an opinion. And we're really seeing that right now with this virus. Everyone's got an opinion. Everyone has thoughts. Everyone has feelings. And everyone's willing to share those things. But who do you trust? Who do you trust? Who do you put your faith in when there's so many competing opinions? And via the internet, we all have access to each other's thoughts and opinions and feelings. So who do we trust? Who do we believe in at a time like this? Because we know people can be very convincing and people can be very gullible at the same exact time. So who do we trust? Who do we believe in? Who do we put our faith in? Well, that's kind of what Paul lamented. The very first verse in chapter 3 in Galatians, you might remember, Paul said, "O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you?" They were fooled by well-meaning people, by people that maybe loved them or people that maybe had a concern for their soul, but they were fooled into a false gospel of following the law and not into following after Jesus Christ. And so it ended up fooling and leading astray the Galatians, or the people of Galatia. And even though those who were preaching the law were well-meaning, they were still wrong. So once again, it comes back to the question of who can you trust? Who can you put your faith in to tell you the truth? And that's what I want to dive into today, because Paul dives into that idea of who can you trust in moments of crisis, in moments of difficulty, in moments of deep questions. Who can I put my trust and hope and faith in? And Paul dives into that in chapter 4, verse 12. He says, "Brothers, I entreat you, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You did me no wrong. You know it was because of my bodily ailment that I preached the gospel to you at first. And though my condition was a trial to you, you did not scorn or despise me, but received me as an angel of God, as Christ Jesus." So Paul spent time in Galatia. He spent a great amount of time with those people, ministering to those people. And a lot of it, he spent more time there than he normally would have spent there because of a physical ailment. And what did Paul do during that difficult time, right? If you remember the statement I made right there at the beginning, that you can really get to know a person when you watch them go through difficulty. So how did Paul respond in that difficult time? He preached the gospel. You can see that Paul's message and Paul's mission and everything that Paul wanted in life was centered around the gospel of Jesus Christ and other people finding the freedom that he had found in Jesus. And that was Paul's mission. He laid that out. I want you to be free in Jesus as I am free in Jesus. And now, that doesn't automatically make him trustworthy, but it helps. Because there's actually several things we want to consider when we're looking at the trustworthiness of a person. First, are they seeking their own good or yours? So Paul's sick, he's down, he can't travel, he can't perform life as he normally would, and he still sought to preach the gospel, to bring other people to faith in Jesus. Even though he was sick and down, he made the gospel his number one mission. And that's where we can see that Paul was not seeking his own good. He wasn't laying on a bed saying, take care of me, I'm an apostle. He was saying, let me care for you. Let me help you. Let me bring you freedom that I have found in Jesus Christ. Because he could have sat back and demanded to be taken care of, but no, he took care of the broken and sick souls of other people, even in the midst of his physical ailment. He never once for a moment wavered from the gospel of Jesus Christ. He was so committed, and that builds trust in us because Paul he wasn't seeking his own gain, he was seeking the gain of others in the midst of this time. So the Galatians had everything to gain: eternal life, freedom from sin, freedom from the law, and a hope and a faith in Jesus Christ. All Paul would have gained would be a brother and sister in Christ, which is a huge benefit, but not nearly as much as the people of Galatia were going to benefit. The second thing that Paul said was, you did me no wrong. He had no reason to deceive them. He had no reason to put anything in between him and them. They didn't do him any wrong. He didn't do them any wrong. They treated him well. He treated them well. They had a deep and good relationship. And if you remember me talking about the helicopter and how my wife was put on this helicopter, one of the things that made us more comfortable was she had grown up with one of the guys that was on the EMT team, that he was helping us get everything kind of in order and ready, and she knew him. She'd grown up with. There was a relationship there, and we weren't afraid. It put us more at ease because of the relationship. We could trust that they were going to take care of us. They had a deep relationship, and Paul had that with the Galatians. When they took care of him, when they loved on him, when they helped him out, they had built a relationship. And Paul never tried to get anything from them or get anything over on them. In fact, and the third way, the final way that I want to point out that we can tell if we can trust a person is, what do they have to lose? So if someone is willing to give of themselves and give greatly of themselves, and they have nothing to gain, as Paul didn't have anything to gain, but what was he set to lose? Paul had quite a bit that he was set to lose. Simply put, it was going to cost him literally everything. So he was hated by Rome because he was preaching that Jesus was God and not Caesar. And the Romans believed that Caesar was God. So they believed that Paul was preaching against their God and king. And the Jews hated God basically for the same reason. And although the Romans and Jews were in conflict, they were more than happy to team up against the Apostle Paul and to seek his life. So Paul was set to lose his citizenship and his heritage. So he's a Roman citizen and a Jew, and he was set to lose both of those things in his life. His foundation would be gone. That was what Paul had given up. What is a person willing to lose for your good? And that's an indication that you're probably able to trust that person, that they're not trying to live for their own personal gain. Paul was giving up everything. And what we saw is many people were saved. Paul described it as their blessedness. And their blessedness is exactly what they were abandoning. So look at verse 15. What then has become of your blessedness? For I testify to you that, if possible, you would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me. Have I then become an enemy by telling you the truth? And this speaks to how deep that relationship with Paul and the Galatians went. And it kind of gives us a little insight also into Paul's sufferings. Most likely it was something with his eyes, because he said there, I don't know if you caught it, like, you would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me. And that's such an out of place statement unless the backstory is there's an eye issue. And most scholars agree that Paul's thorn in the flesh, that this ailment here was most likely something with his eyes that was bothering him. And they said their love for him was so deep, it was so rich, that they would have given literal parts of themselves if they could do it to help Paul out. And that reason that they would do that is because of Paul's faithfulness to them and his faithfulness to the gospel, right? But what Paul wants them to see is he doesn't want their eyes. He wants them to be faithful to Jesus. He doesn't want them to run back after old things. He doesn't want literally for them to pluck their eyes out and give them to him. As much as it ailed him, that's not what he wants. He wants them to be saved, to be free in Jesus Christ, and he wants them to see Jesus with their own eyes and not to give those eyes to him. Paul's like, please, would you just see Jesus for who he is? And in him saying that, in him kind of sharing that with them, there was a feeling of where they were starting to possibly get offended by the fact that Paul would say such a thing to them. They couldn't believe that Paul would be willing to say to them, like, could you just be faithful? Is it too much to ask for you to be faithful to Jesus? Please, right? And that is a phrase that, quite honestly, probably offended many of the people that read this. And Paul makes that statement that, just by telling you the truth, am I now your enemy? Right? Because in Proverbs 27:6, it should hearken those law followers back to Proverbs 27:6, where he said, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy, or profuse are the kisses of an enemy. Don't be deceived by the flattery of a false prophet, right? And this is really what Paul digs into in the next couple verses. So I'm going to point it out, but I want to read the verses. They make much of you, but for no good purpose. They shut you out. To make much of them. It is always good to be made much of for a good purpose. And not only when I am present with you, my little children, for whom am I again in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you? I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone, for I am perplexed about you. So Paul points out that those who kind of been led astray, and he starts to point that those people who are leading you away, they can't be trusted. They're seeking their own gain. They're seeking prestige. They're seeking to be made much of. And in fact, they're not coming at you in truth, in words that hurt. They're coming at you in flattery. And they're seeking to stroke your pride and to make much of you and to feed your ego and to feed your pride so that you begin to feel like you don't need Jesus. And that's really the direction they're starting to push. And you can see Paul has this pain, physical pains of almost like labor in his heart, where he is afraid that they have been led astray. And in fact, it's costing Paul something just to watch them go through this time. And this is the great danger of our society today. And Paul will respond more to what they want to hear about the truth. Paul's going to respond a little bit more to the truth. And he said, and I a lot of times find myself in that same place, responding to people with truth. And a lot of times I'm perplexed too that people don't want to hear the truth. And it shocked Paul, it shocks me. People don't want to hear the truth. They want to have their ego and their pride flattered. They want to be built up in pride. And this is a negative cycle in your life, because it's going to take more and more and more flattery to continue to feed your pride. And it's perplexing. It's shocking. I don't know, and no one I know that I can talk to and get advice from knows how, including the Apostle Paul, knows how to break that cycle. I don't know how to get a person to respond to the truth and stop accepting the lies. I don't know how to do it. And the Apostle Paul didn't either. He was perplexed by it. Only the Holy Spirit, and I pray at this moment that the Holy Spirit speak to you. If you're in a place where you don't want to hear the truth, you're living a life that's dangerous and sinful, and you're chasing after foolish things, and you're acting like you own the world and that no rules apply to you, and that Jesus Christ, he can just take his message and get out of your life because you know the best way. If you're living a life of a fool and you're acting like that, then Jesus Christ, he's the one that's going to have to break through and talk to you. And I'm praying even now that he would do that in your life, that he would come and he would show you the places you're being foolish. He would reveal to you the places in your heart that you're chasing after flattery over the truth, and that he would break that down. Because for me, for the Apostle Paul, and every preacher in between, we're perplexed by it. I don't know how to break through to you except for the Holy Spirit of God come and does it. But in this life, we don't know who to trust. But these are just some short little ways that the Apostle Paul pointed out that he could be trusted. What's he have to gain? What's he have to lose? Is there a relationship there? Is he telling you the truth? Are they telling you words that bite? And these are just some little ways that we can look at a person and say, are they telling me the truth or are they telling me a lie? And then don't run after feelings. I cannot emphasize this enough. When we live our lives by emotion, when we live our lives based upon feeling, we are much more likely to be flattered and to chase after what feels good as opposed to the truth. Don't let feelings take over reason and truth in your life. Chase after the truth. Because feelings have no, when we live by feeling, it has no good purpose in our lives. It is not seeking our best. But when we live by the truth, we can be set free by the words of Jesus Christ. But when we chase feelings over truth, it will not lead you into freedom. It'll lead you into slavery. Well, ready to get going?
Sure.
Yeah? Sure?
Are we recording?
We are absolutely recording.
Okay.
Yeah. We're not live or anything, but
Okay.
we're recording. Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
So, yeah. All right. Well, so you saw the sermon. Hopefully you had some time to watch that, get a chance to see what the Apostle Paul had to say to the people of Galatia on the subject of who can you trust. And I know in a time of Facebook and Instagram and internet meme and all the garbage that we have floating around on the greatest communications device since the printing press, that there's a lot of information out there. And who do you trust? And hopefully we gave you a little bit of a roadmap into who you can trust, who can be your source of truth in moments like these. But Cameron and I want to dig a little deeper into that subject. So if you have the next 15 minutes, give it to us, please, and we will make it worth your while, we promise. So first, though, I want to introduce you to a young man by the name of Cameron Meyers. Now, Cameron Meyers is interviewing with us at this moment for a youth pastor position here at the church, and we're very excited to have him here. But unfortunately, we're in the midst of the coronavirus, and we can't make him stand up and embarrass him in front of the church, so he's going to do it forever on the internet. Now, Cameron, go ahead, check on the camera there and just tell them who you are, what you're about.
I'm Cameron Meyers. I am a youth pastor, has been in Dayton, Ohio. I'm not originally from there. I'm originally from Lynchburg, Virginia, where I grew up, doing youth ministry for about 5 years now. It's definitely where I feel God has called me to be. We're just leading where God is calling and seeing what he has for us.
Yeah. And we are praying, and we invite you to pray with us as well, that this would be a good fit. And if it is, great, we're going to chase it. If not, we're going to amicably walk away from the situation. So we don't want to move in any way that isn't God's will. But we did want you to meet him, and unfortunately it has to be virtual at this moment. But say hi. So, all right. What was your biggest impact through this through this chunk? So Galatians 12 through 20, what stood out to you?
This is honestly an awesome passage, and it really shows Paul's heart and Paul's goal. And I think it is actually super applicable to us currently specifically with the way the church is moving and like the church as a whole, the big C is moving. The first thing I saw was like Paul had a very big heart and love and concern for the Galatians. And I feel like that matches his tone in the entirety of the letter. And so not just in this passage where he is still this like kind of aggressive, kind of paternal tone where he's telling them almost like it's like a discipline at this point. But in other areas where he's even called them foolish, he's gone to like saying who's bewitched you, who's tricked you in that way. He kind of continues this and it matches his love for them.
Yeah.
So I think if he didn't, like, if, for example, if he didn't care, he probably wouldn't even write to them at all, probably would just let them go. Maybe at most send someone to check on them and then report back to him.
Yeah. Or he'd say, oh, it's a nice tax write-off and I'll forget about it. It's going to be okay.
Right.
Just walked away, washed his hands of it, been done.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And his goal is more than just an evangelist, because that's his major life's calling after his conversion was he went to churches and preached the gospel and went to churches and preached the gospel. But what's different about him is I would say that he's just as much of a pastor and a shepherd as he is an evangelist. Yeah. Because he is not only, like, he only moves on when he has someone there. And if he's not there physically, he's writing to them and he's going back and he wants to see them again. And he stays with these churches, not just so that he has a nice vacation, a place to stay, but because he cares about them and their spiritual growth. Yeah.
He was a very selfless minister. You know, he gave a lot of himself and didn't ask for like overtime pay or pay, period. But yeah, if you read through some of his writings, he wasn't collecting a paycheck.
Right.
Yeah.
He purposely sacrificed that, and he's stated that as a way of gaining credibility to say like, no, I'm not doing this because of the money. Like no one does ministry for the money. They're doing it because they feel the call of God. Yeah.
The only way to make money in ministry is to do it poorly. It seems like all the guys, televangelists, the guys that are out there sowing outright discord or outright falsehood are the ones flying in a Learjet. Right. Like your guy that's faithfully preaching the gospel and discipling people week in, week out, he's not the guy getting rich right now.
Right. Yeah. Right. And the ironic thing is that like, as much as they're getting rich off of it, their information is less valuable.
Right.
You know, and like the poor man, Paul, who has literally lost everything, including his health, including his safety for this, is speaking of a message that is more valuable than anything. Yeah. And the people that are getting rich off of it are, preaching an empty gospel.
Of course, Paul's eternal reward is much better.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Then I would not want to be a false teacher and stand before the holy God one day and say, how about it, Lord, would you take a few million? Maybe if I can just bribe God.
Right. Because God needs our money.
Right. Yeah. He's concerned. He's worried that ends won't meet,
Right.
Yeah. No. And that's, the kind of beauty of the Apostle Paul was that he was very much so a pastor that was working his way through evangelism and not an evangelist that was trying to fit into a pastor mold. And it actually made him a better evangelist because he had that pastor's heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I saw like his major argument and what he's saying, because I think at this point, if he were to just keep going and going and going, the Galatians would probably notice and they would probably take it as like, oh, he's just like ragging on me about this and that and this, and you're doing this wrong and you're doing this wrong. It would be easy for them to interpret this as like negative and like, you just don't like me. And so even with it in his tone, his argument is that like, no, like you care about me and I care about you. Like that love, that relationship is there. Yeah. So if that's there, if you were willing to sacrifice for me, why is it that when I tell you something that's true, like you treat me as an enemy? Like why am I all of a sudden an enemy when I'm telling you the things that are actually growing you towards Christ?
Right. A false teacher won't discipline you because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's not their goal.
Right. Yeah, and it's outside of their mission. Yeah. Yeah. Like there's no reason to get you on their bad side if their only thing they're seeking is to mislead you.
Right.
You know.
Right. And I think that would be reflective of their heart, of their ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see a pastor, and I can see this often, and I've seen this often in churches, where pastors will preach and they'll give you good messages and you feel attracted to that message, right? And it's because information is so available, like you're talking about, like the great communicator of the computer and online, the information is less valuable. And so it's not the truth of the matter at that point. It's the cunning and the way that you speak. And so when a pastor will speak, that's one thing. But the pastoral ministry is where you really see the heart. Because if the pastor is really seeking to evangelize and really seeking to pastor, there will be that discipline. There will, because we are sinful people, there will be times over and over again where the pastor has to say, no, all right, come step into my office. Let's talk for a second and really put you back on that right track.
Yeah.
And that's not just in pastors, but in disciples in general. Like in my life, I've had a lot of people that are discipling me, a lot of youth leaders. So I was a big youth brat going through youth group in church. And I could tell the difference between the youth leaders that really wanted to disciple me and wanted to be there for other purposes, because I could see the ones that were really good preachers, but never really like pricked me and poked me and pushed me. And the ones that I didn't care about their preaching, but they really pushed me to Jesus.
Yeah.
And they did that in their preaching. But they would tell me like, hey, you're sinning here. Hey, no, like this is not the gospel, you know? And that's what I actually needed.
And that's something I've had in conversations with several people where you're dealing with a situation and you say, I love you, but I love the truth more. And let's get to the truth and find out where we don't line up with the truth.
Right.
And so that's an important thing, I think, for a pastor to be so grounded in the truth of Jesus Christ, his sacrifice on the cross, his resurrection, and then his redemption of the world, is to be so grounded in the truth of Christ that then when they are in relationship, that they're willing to sacrifice the relationship on the altar of the truth.
Right. Right. Which really makes this passage less of a negative tone and more, if you understand the gospel and you understand the value and the severity of the gospel, then you understand that like what Paul is doing is hard and discipline, but ultimately it's like glorifying. And if the change happens that he is expecting, then it's a jewel on his crown. Like it's a reward for him to see God working in someone's life.
Right. And that was the only gain he was seeking, was that the people would have a relationship with Jesus, that they would find the freedom in Christ that Paul has found. Yeah. That was he didn't ask for anything else. He just wanted to see people set free in Jesus Christ. Yeah. And he saw that in Galatia. That's why he said, like, he talked about their blessedness that they were abandoning. He's like, I saw you guys doing this, and now you're giving it up. Like, how could you have a taste of freedom and then turn away from it?
Right.
And that was last week's sermon, was on nostalgia and how we thought, well, remember the good old days, and we turn so easily. Right. And that's why he said, like, you so foolish, who bewitched you? But
it's very easy. Yeah. I mean, like, we keep going back to this, but like information is so available. Yeah. And not just good information. Right. Not just Christian information. Yeah. And it's very enticing to go back to an old identity. Very easy.
It kind of shows how I, as the shepherd of this church, need my heart shepherded from time to time. Right. I need someone to walk with me through things I just can't resolve on my own. Right. And so I have at least the experience with being discipled to seek that out.
Yeah. And that, I mean, this is reflective in this passage of like, this is, one, shows the greatness of the truth, because that's how this is not a negative passage. Right. But two, it shows the necessity of discipleship. Because if we're really talking about like passive pastors or passive ministry, or passive even Christ fellowship, or like following, you'll see that people are going to be, they love and are attracted to the positive. They love to hear that God loves you. I love that. like that God fully knows you and fully loves you, and like all the verses that says that God knit you together in mother womb and all that.
Right.
But they're so afraid of the truth, and they're afraid to be pushed. They're afraid to say, "Hey, but God is also holy, and you're not living up to His standard."
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Now, how do you get past the knowledge that you never will live up to His standard?
I think that's the point that Paul makes all throughout the New Testament, is that because we can't meet the standard, we have to look to Christ. And so I see it as Ephesians 2. Like in Ephesians 2, Paul was making this big contrast of we were once dead in our trespasses and sins. We walked in that. We followed under a different power. We were stuck in that, dead, with the implication that we can't do anything. So how do I deal with the fact that I'll never live up to that standard but God?
Right.
So, but God being rich in mercy, like Him coming to us, that's how I can deal with the fact that I won't live up to a standard. Because otherwise, like my natural as a man, like you set a standard, if I don't reach it, then there's something wrong with me. You know, and I will push on people's heads. I'll do whatever I can to meet the standard that you've put in front of me.
Sure.
And if I look at Christ and God's standard for holiness and perfection, and knowing that I can't meet it, that's the opposite of hope. That's despair. You know, and so having an answer, having Christ as my gift of salvation, rather than something that I'm earning, that's the positive truth. That's the only thing that I can hold on to. That's my anchor of hope.
Right.
You know, and that's why Paul is so adamant about this message, because it's not just that they're seeking another gospel, it's that they're seeking Jesus and Jewish law. Right. Jesus and I have to do other things. Like
circumcision, dietary laws.
Yeah. So Jesus saved me from my sins, and Jesus meets that standard for me. But I also have to be clean on my own. I also have to meet that standard.
Yeah. It's free. You just need to earn it.
Right. Which makes no sense.
Right. Yeah.
So, and I think that's where this is such a pointed message for today, because like you said in the last message about nostalgia, like we want more than just the gospel.
Right.
Like in our flesh, like it's hard for us to see that Jesus plus nothing is everything. Because as a man, I feel like I need to have some part in it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. If I didn't earn it, it's not mine.
Right.
Yeah. Or I don't deserve it. You know, for sure. You know, and that's a hard thing, like you say, you know, especially for men. And maybe that's why, like, you walk into a church and overwhelmingly it will be filled with women, especially in leadership roles. And in a lot of ways, it does seem like for men, it's a harder concept to get, that I don't have to do something for this.
It's a gift.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's funny, like, because Nolan and I discussed that last week about the idea of that the only thing that I don't have to give up something for, or you know, give something to get, is Jesus Christ. You know, that's a free gift. And then it's like, well, of course, I have to. How's he put that? You know, you have to die to yourself. You have to give up. Who doesn't give his life? Well, how's he put that? Whoever gives his life for my sake will find it.
Yeah,
and so there is, even in salvation, there is that surrender and abandon that we have to.
It's where Paul meets James.
And
where it's like, Paul is like, by grace you've been saved, and James is like, words aren't really enough. You know, like there has to be some kind of action. Even Satan believes that the Bible's true. That's why Paul's
even preaching. There has to be action here.
Yeah.
You know, that like, you know, you haven't been faithful. Where are your actions? Paul's saying. You know, and he's there with James saying, faith without works is dead. Sure, you have great faith, but like you haven't worked out faithfulness. You've worked out the law.
Right.
But you haven't been faithful to Jesus.
Right.
You know, and that was his heart, was like, could you, like, I don't want, you know, I kind of talked about it here in the sermon at the end, but like, I don't want your faithfulness, or I don't want your eyes. I don't want your eyesight. I don't want your gifts. I don't want your money. I don't want your medical care. I want faithfulness from you.
Right.
And Paul is adamant about that.
And that's so God's heart.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking of Psalms 51, David, who's just sinned.
Yeah.
And he's going to God and saying, like, I've sinned, please forgive me, out of your like love, forgive me for this.
Right.
And he gets to this point where he says, like, you don't want a sacrifice.
Right.
You don't want me to like atone for my sins. You don't want me to just give the bull to the priest. You want a contrite and broken heart.
Yeah, steadfast love and faithfulness. I think Hosea talks about that.
Yeah.
Sacrifices I want not. I want steadfast love and faithfulness, and that's it. That is what Jesus requires of us: steadfast love and faithfulness, and it is so hard to get our minds around.
Right.
Yeah. A friend of mine, his name's Weston Kotze, just wrote a book, and I'll ask him if I'm allowed to plug this. I'm sure it is. I am, because he wrote a book. Right. And it's called Tied to the Dock, and it's called How to Live Forgiven in a World That Won't Forgive You. And it's I'm excited to read it. I was like, save me a couple copies. I want to give it away, because it is a thing. Like, if people knew what was in your heart, I doubt they'd forgive you for it.
Right.
And but if we knew what was in theirs, would we forgive them? And I think that's a big part of why we stay so closed off.
And it's not, and I think that's what he's kind of getting at here too. It's not like he's the priest who's looking down on the Galatians. He's saying in the beginning part, like, be like me.
Right.
And he says this is a common narrative to all of his churches, but like, be like me, be imitators of me, follow me. And the act of discipleship is not, I'm telling you what to do, but I'm going to be exempt from that.
Yeah.
He's saying, I'm doing this.
Right.
You've seen what I've gone through. You've seen what I'm doing for you. I'm doing this, so you should do it too.
Right.
And that like shows me how greatly we need disciplers. We need people to be pouring into us to keep us in check and to keep us moving. Yeah. And we need to be doing that to other people. Yeah. Like, that's the goal. That's the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah. And find someone that has what you lack, and then ride close to that guy. Right. And get near that person, right. And find someone that needs what you have and bring them along. And I think that twofold relationship matters, that I be bringing someone with me and that I be following somebody, to get closer to Christ and to bring someone along with me closer to Jesus. Right. And because you see that in like the Elijah-Elisha relationship, that, Elijah had this power of the Spirit. He needed someone to take his place. Elisha was called, and he needed to have the power that Elijah had to do the work that he had to do, which is it's a super interesting study if you ever get time to look into that relationship, because Elisha fulfilled some of the callings that Elijah had from God that he never had a chance to do, but Elisha fulfilled it. So like, how many preachers die with a vision and have never brought a man along that can complete the work that God gave that man to do because he didn't build into the next generation? And how many neighbors and friends and family members never built into the next generation enough to watch them flourish and watch them complete the work that God had for them to do. And they lament like, oh, there's so much work to be done. Right. Raise up a leader, raise up a disciple.
Right. You can't say there's so much work to be done and then in response not start the work. Yeah. That's the opposite of the gospel. Gospel is saying like, there's so much to harvest here. The workers are few. Right. That wasn't a call to sit and stop working.
Right. Or to whine about how much work there was.
Right. He said that once.
Right. Yeah. So he wants to point us to the heart of Paul, where it's a discipler's heart. He wants to see people saved. Right. Wants to see people know Jesus. And,
kind of touching on what you said earlier about how information and people can sway you, even if they're feeling like they're doing the right thing and they're not. They don't have a bad heart. Right. It really says something about evaluating the people that are discipling you. Because at this point, when Paul left, the people that came in to take kind of the leadership role and the kind of to sway the Galatians' hearts, in good conscience, were pushing them away. Yeah. With adding Jewish things, with adding stuff that is not the gospel, they are discipling in the wrong way. Yeah. And I could be easily discipled by like a preacher from some random church on the internet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't know anything about what they believe.
Yeah, you don't see them, kind of started the sermon off with the idea that if you want to see what a person's really about, watch them in a difficult situation. Yeah. And you won't ever get the chance to watch that person in a difficult place because you're not there.
Because my teachers don't have 100 students in the classroom. Right. I can't see the needs of the one.
It is a difficult task to see the discipleship needs of a person, especially if they're not being open with you. Because we are masters of disguise, and we can really put up a facade and say, like, no, everything's good. And church, I make the joke in our church that it's church and it's not always the place to be honest. But unfortunately, that's how we feel. There's a lot of truth in that it's like, how you doing? I'm great, brother. Not saying that you cussed at your wife on the way to church.
Right.
Yeah. And you're having the worst day of your life, and here, I'm doing great, brother. You do, but church just isn't the place to say, I'm really struggling. Can we go talk?
Yeah.
And having those relationships with people, because that's discipleship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what you get is a stigma of, like, I'm walking into a church building, and so this is where God's people are.
Yeah.
And if I personally, in my own heart, don't feel like I'm meeting up to the standard of a Christian, then I'm somehow not part of the in group that is the church. And so I have to pretend like I am part of the in group with the false narrative that I will still try my hardest to actually live up to that potential. When it's like what we talked about is you won't ever. And none of the other people are.
Right.
And it's so hard to come out about our brokenness because one, sometimes it's not always wise to just go out about your brokenness.
Right.
Someone dealing with, like, sexual sin probably shouldn't just speak that to the women's group.
Right.
Like there's wise ways of saying things and how you address things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, it's also necessary to give that information to someone because it's not only one getting it out there. So it's not just your burden of sin to deal with anymore, but also you have someone that's not only going to take that burden, but try to take it far away from you.
Yeah.
As well.
And keep you far from it.
Right.
Because we aren't commanded to walk near sin. We're commanded to run from it.
Right.
Right. And get out of there. Get away from it. That thing will eat your lunch 8 days a week.
Yeah.
It's like, no doubt you're going to get smoked by it.
Right. And the Bible is never passive about dealing with sin.
Right.
It never uses passive verbs. It never uses things that are very easy and relaxed. It's either flee from it, crucify it, kill it, murder it.
Yeah. You want to look at how seriously God takes sin. Look at the cross.
Gouge out your eyes.
Yeah. Gouge out your eyes. Yeah. Yeah. Cut your arm off. Yeah. And that's, what a disciple, if you, you're striking a death blow to that thing when you go to a brother and you say, or a sister, stick within gender for discipleship, but when you go to a brother or sister and you say, here's my sin, help me kill it. There it is. It's 2-on-1, and you're just have a better chance of taking it out.
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap it up. Anything else? Yeah. Well, that's it. So thank you for hanging out with us, enjoying the discussion, meeting Cameron Meyers. All his personal contact info will be at the end of the video. So
I don't know.
We're interviewing him once again to potentially be our student pastor, and wanted you to have a chance to see his face, hear his voice, hear what he thinks about Jesus, and know who he is. So love you, church. We will see you soon. Bye.